Okay, so if you have any questions, either on the films or to Thomas and his practice, or about the techniques that Janet has used in her film, so yeah, please.
Thanks for those films. Very, very interesting. I'd like to ask you both, Btihaj and Janet, what, as filmmakers, what were your intentions to achieve, and what kind of audiences are you looking for?
Well, for me, the audience was actually a general audience. So I wanted to bring something that is academic and scholarly into a wider public. And as you can appreciate, not many people, like lay people, actually read academic articles. So for me, it was very important to explore another way, another method of actually conveying the knowledge and conveying the key kind of concepts and the key arguments about self-tracking. So I try to be as balanced as I can, because I didn't want to present self-tracking as like a very beneficial exercise, yet I did not want to paint it in a very negative light. So I tried to kind of show through Thomas' example how it can help actually users to better their health and so on, and cure themselves from certain problems like allergies. But at the same time, we have to be wary of who is owning our data, who has access to our data, how is data being handled, and so many other questions surrounding responsibility, healthcare, and so on. So my vision was that through this short film, I can reach a wider audience than mainly the confines of the academic one. Yeah.
Okay, can you hear me? Yeah. Mine was purely a kind of art creative project, I guess. I wasn't trying to reach anyone other than, I suppose, try and create something. And in fact, I like, Deborah, the latter part of your talk about how artists and others have tried to visualize data and also different metaphors. I've been trying to work on sort of data as part of our life, and it's actually quite difficult if you think about it. You can't see it. It's sort of somewhere in the computer, and I think I was very lucky. I got hold of some visuals. I was able to film this data arena at UTS, which is sort of like a 360-degree screen where they had scientists who, that particular one was the Wombian Cave, which is a place in New South Wales where they put in some sort of sensor. I think it was like a drone kind of thing, and they just was able to map the whole place in sort of digital way, and then they film it in a 360-degree screen, so it was really quite dramatic. And well, I mean, the film speaks for itself. I mean, what I was trying to do was a bit like what you were saying, how we are not separable from our data anymore. The data become us, and we become our data. So we can't actually do without being connected anymore. Anyway, that was sort of just a playful thing.
Hello, I have a question over here.
Oh, yes.
To Btihaj?
Yes.
And Thomas perhaps, but my question is related to the people that you interview. So you follow Thomas, but then you have Emma Holton as sort of the counter voice, and that, to me, and especially also based on what she says, indicates, or it at least comes across as also a generational question. So she articulates herself as a millennial that draws back, while you, Thomas, also state yourself as an early adopter, but so a nerd now, but it will become practice. And I was just wondering if there was a choice for you, Btihaj, in portraying this generational gap, or if it's more a question of Emma being a counter voice to a lot of things in this context, self-tracking. Thank you.
Yes, I mean, it's a great question. Well, initially it was not really a conscious choice from my part. but it just kind of organically developed. And what interested me is that the younger generation is more and more retreating from these practices, and it's actually, well, I don't want to call you older generation, but but the older generation is actually adopting. It's like with Facebook, for instance. Facebook now is populated mainly by people from 40s plus. And all the teenagers actually live in Facebook because they feel that it's becoming uncool. But it's not just not being cool enough, but it's also about question of politics, because I think the digital natives are also realizing now that the oversharing culture, it's not just sharing, but oversharing culture is actually backfiring at them. Some people lose jobs because of tweets they put out there. Some people, get affected in many ways by what the traces they leave behind, and people are becoming more and more aware. But Emma, obviously, she's a political activist, and I'm not sure if people are familiar with Emma Holton. I think she's very famous in Denmark, but outside of Denmark, probably not. But she has been herself the victim of revenge porn a few years ago when she was 17. And what was worse is that a German channel called RTL actually used the pictures that were hacked into in their report. And then she sued them and she won. And now, since then, she became a voice for trying to make a difference for people, especially for young people who have been victim of revenge porn. And also, one interesting response from her side was that she hired a photographer and she posed naked for the photographer, and she posted them there in online space out of choice in order to differentiate between the object-subject's position and to raise awareness about this is what consent is, like I consent to publish these naked pictures of myself, and this is what a breach of privacy is. So to show people the difference, it's not about nakedness or sexuality, but it's about these parameters and boundaries of what is private and what is not. So it was not initially a conscious choice, but I found myself, as I'm doing all these interviews, and picking the different kind of discourses, the different attitudes towards tracking. And it was interesting to see that, she's only 25 years old and already really resisting anything to do with the digital, although she is a digital activist. So she's trying to use the technology as a way of countering what's being done through technology in a way. So that was, for me, the interesting part.
I'm not sure I totally agree on I don't know your name, but your assessment of the different generations. I was asking you. Yeah, okay, yeah.
Oh, sorry, I overtaken, yes.
Yeah, but in the sense that, as you said quite late in the film, I said that some of the practices that were quite nerdy in the early days of doing self-tracking, they have now become commonplace. Yeah. And an example is that after the 2012 Quantified Self, or was it 2011 Medicine X conference, we're like at a table at a dinner, and we were 3 people that were taking photos of what we were eating, and that was strange. And now my best friend's 11-year-old son, he's snapping photos to post them on Instagram. Now it's not strange taking photos of your food, but it was in 2011. So I think that's a different kind of shift taking place, and of course there's a difference between whether you are collecting data for your own purposes. I have mostly been collecting data for my own purposes. I don't especially like social media, and that's why I keep most of my data to myself, and then I share findings and methods and learnings from my data. I don't share the raw data, so to speak. But I think we have younger generations or younger people that have been kind of ushered into a world where that's just what you do. You track some data, and then some other people will be sharing it, or some services will be sharing it. I think that's a different thing. So I think there might be some different forces at play here. Yeah.
So just a question for Thomas. In all of these years,
there's a microphone coming your way, so we can hear you more. Thank you.
Thanks. So Thomas, in all of these years of self-tracking, have there been any notable changes that you've made, either to how you track or what you do with the data? In other words, have you reflected on your own practice and made changes accordingly?
It's an iterative process. It's been all the years, and I guess you didn't mention in the movie, but I've actually been building my own tools all the way along, because back in the days, there weren't any tools available for self-training, the kind of self-training that I wanted to do. I'll be talking some more about it tomorrow during the session, but I've been trying a lot of phenomena that I can observe myself, because when I started out wanting to track my allergies, I didn't have access to any of the biomedical tests or panels or all that stuff. It simply wasn't available. So I had to come up with ways of tracking things that I believe mattered, using my own methods and my own tools. So I'm kind of on my third generation of tools, starting out with some very crude digital tools, and then building a smartphone app with some partners, and now building kind of wearable technology for capturing your subjective experience and observations of your what we call subjective perceived phenomena. But I'll just mention a kind of a seismic shift in my self-training, which was in 2015, where I have a friend in New York, and Josh, he was actually working together with me in a company, also doing some coaching around self-tracking. And he said, "Thomas, you've been tracking so much for so long. Can you not track? I think you've become addicted by tracking." So I said, "Well, I can not track." So I said, "Well, in a few days, it's the 1st of March, and I'll stop tracking anything but my sneezes, because that data set has gotten like a life of its own." It's like I'm kind of committed to doing that, because nobody else has a data set like that. Even in immunology, I found out they don't have longitudinal data like I have on sneezes. So I have to continue that. But then overnight, I basically stopped tracking everything else. So I found out I wasn't addicted. I could actually not track. Well, basically, I've been tracking much less since. I've been focusing on a few factors since then. And that was like so that was like a seismic shift in my self-training. Then during the last year or two, I've been going much more into passive sensing and using, as you can tell, devices sitting on me. But yeah, so just to tell you, there have been some seismic shift too in my self-training. Yeah.
There is a question here first. Oh. Yes, thank you.
Thank you. I think, Thomas, you kind of answered what I was getting to. I was wondering, one, I like the juxtaposition between sort of self-tracking and the quantified self as opposed to quantified others, that your two films kind of, because we talk about this agenda, but we talk about both technologies that we track ourselves for our own personal self-development. But at the same time, I know you develop your own tools, but most people wear Fitbit. And by default, therefore, share their data with Fitbit. Most of the laymen people, not us academics, and do not really comprehend that. Mm-hmm. Like they're not on top of mind. And the other thing is, to what extent as a society, because of that trend, we become so self-absorbed? I mean, which is something that we don't discuss as much. Like, we spend so much time self-tracking, making sense about ourselves. We kind of ignore what's going around us because this is where we're focusing on. To what extent, therefore, our happiness is a navel-gazing internal thing, as opposed to us being social beings and social actors because of that trend. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I think that's one of those questions where it can go kind of either way, or there are different forces at play. In the sense, personally for me, I have learned much more about how I react in social situations now, how I can, interact with people from doing self-training. And I would also say when it comes to, especially in the health domain, like what is population health if it's not like each individual leading, the kind of life they want, right? And being as healthy as they want. So I think talk about like the aggregate without looking at what is really going on the individual level doesn't really make sense. So and I've heard about other people in Quantified Self. They have also experienced this thing about they've actually become more aware about themselves as social beings by doing the self-tracking, and be much more attuned to bodily signals and feelings and sensations that are related to social situations. And actually, I've just done a paper with Jacob E. Larsen from DTU and together with a psychologist from the Danish Defense, and we did a small pilot with just one veteran from Afghanistan, and by doing self-tracking, just one single phenomenon, one single very specific bodily sensation, he found out that, together with the Casper psychologist, that actually there were certain people at work that were initiating this cascade of PTSD that would unravel when he was alone at home at night. So he found out that certain social situations, they were not good for him. So I think it's, don't jump to conclusions about the individual and the social,
I'd just like to add something. One of my former PhD students had just written something about selfies. I don't know whether you saw that article. She was talking about selfie as a form of self-expression and also a way of giving voice to people who normally don't have any voice in society. But I'm actually more worried about the fact that a lot of our data that we transmit, I'm not talking about you because you don't transmit yours, have become training data for commercial companies so that they can refine their techniques to sell things to us or to control us in other ways, and that's the part that it's very invisible.
Was a question first there somewhere, like the lady in the red jacket first? The lady in the red jacket, thank you.
I have a question for you, Thomas. I was wondering, in your opinion, your self-tracking practices, did they initiate it because you felt empowered to take control and to be more knowledgeable about your own behavioral habits, or was it more a necessity due to lack of resources in the healthcare system?
None of the above, really, but it's a good question. So the thing was that my allergies, they were getting really bad, and I could tell it was impacting my quality of life, my performance. I lived from thinking, and I could tell that during the summertime, especially, I was so tired. I was tired like an old man. I couldn't think, and then it even started extending into the winters, and then I went to my doctor, and she was nice, but I could tell that there wasn't really this approach to problem solving, really. And I was working as a consultant that time, helping software companies in special improve their processes. So I thought, well, I know much more about improving processes than this medical approach, and so I didn't even know it was called self-tracking then. The process I started, or what I ventured out into, was like, I have these symptoms, I have this condition, I don't know exactly what's going on, but there's got to be some factors that are driving this phenomenon. So I knew from improving process, then you need some data on what's going on. And that was why I started self-tracking, because I want to characterize these processes to see if I can get some levers, to see if I can kind of break some things apart and figure out are there some points where I can intervene and kind of influence my own body to do things differently. So it took some years, even before I knew about the Quantified Self movement. That was in 2011. I hadn't heard about it until then.
Thank you very much for both of you for the films. I think the more artistic one was appealing to me because it illustrated somehow my own anxiety of surveillance in society. And the second one, the more scientific, or you could say the one related to metric cultures, I found it interesting because I find some main ideas that I published in a paper last year, where I tried to propose a framework to understand what you're doing, Thomas. And I followed some people back in my PhD study in 2012 in their willingness to control, to optimize, and to manage their bodies. And what I found interesting was this general will to optimize and manage their bodies. And what I'm thinking as a sociologist and as someone working with health promotion is that this willingness to manage a body, of course, is interesting, but it becomes also a social problem, because you could say that wanting to manage the body leads to a perhaps very narrow definition of health, and that is a health that is a performative health. And not everyone in society has the resources to keep up with this performative, a normative understanding of health. You say it's something common, but not everyone. I mean, even though everyone wants to run a marathon today, not everyone can run a marathon, right? I mean, it's something which is demanding quite a lot of resources. And I think we need to be concerned about this. That is actually also a practice that is leading to social inequality in society, that we're actually leaving some individuals behind us with this, how do you say it, hype of metric cultures or digital solutions. So yeah, that was a.
You want to comment on?
Yeah,
on
of course.
So,
always.
so for me, actually, the whole thing about optimization, I've always been worried about, and I actually learned that when I was doing process improvement consulting, and I actually learned it from Toyota and the Japanese, and they're thinking about it, in the sense that there's only Kaizen, which is there's continuous improvement, and the idea of optimization implies that you know what the optimum is. And I'm not of that school. That's the day, and I'm not of that school. What I've learned and what I've seen in the Quantified Self movement too, is that when you start engaging with these practices, when you do this kind of self-observation, you collect data about yourself, you reflect on it, you find out that what you thought might have been optimums might not be the optimums. And that's really what the important learning is, that the optimums, they are ever changing. So the important thing here is the learning process. And I totally agree that if we kind of just take some crude ideas about optimums and then apply them to the society or the whole population, then it's going in the wrong direction. And there's some, if you know, there's Anne Wright from Quantified Self, Dawn Nafus. They had a great actually kind of fireside chat at QS15 in San Francisco, and they had come up with the slogan, which was "Resist Implodment," which was that this is really about resisting the idea that other people can tell you what you should be optimizing, if we're going to use that word, against. That it's really finding out about, what is your own story and what is your own learning process. So I would, there's a whole other world around self-tracking than the optimization angle. Yeah.
So you would disagree with Emma when she talks about streamlining of society, that you don't see self-tracking as a way of normalizing the social according to a specific parameter or optimum as such. It's more like individualized and personalized.
It can be done individualized and personalized, but I acknowledge there's a danger that the other crude form of self-tracking might be used. Definitely, in that sense, the technology can be used for different purposes, and we really have to figure out how we want to use it. Yeah, it doesn't prescribe it in itself. And then perhaps the other point about technology could be that usually you see these these models of technology development and adoption, and I'm more into Kevin Kelly's model of the have-nows and the have-laters than the haves and the have-nots. In the sense that if you look back, like the mobile phones in the 80s, the development of mobile phones were really subsidized by rich Wall Street bankers, because they were carrying these big, unwieldy things, because they thought they had a real need for it. So actually their money, they paid an overprice for those mobile phones to be able, for people of less income today, to have a smartphone. And I think some of the same things are happening with the self-tracking technologies. What we have been, doing Quantified Self is trying out a lot of stuff, and it's been costly. I've probably been spending around 600 hours just making my observations. Of course, that's totally crazy, but it's also it was a way of experimenting with these methods and these technologies to see how can we make them more accessible for other people. So I think it's too early to criticize this technology for being elitist, because there's this kind of adoption curve and this kind of trajectory of the development of new technologies. A personal computer in 1980 was also incredibly expensive, and you had to have a lot of skill to be able to assemble it even.
Well, we see that's already here. I mean, before, in order to track your steps, you needed to have a pedometer, but now you just have to have your phone, and everything is kind of like what I call the Russian doll effects, one app inside another, so you can do with your phone pretty much everything in relation to self-tracking if you download the right apps.
Mm-hmm.
So, yeah. Any other questions? Yes, that gentleman there, thank you.
Yeah, first, thank you to both of you for very interesting and beautiful films. My name is Ola, and I am a doctor. And first I have a comment and then a question to Thomas. Because first, Thomas, I think you have met a doctor who completely lacked the curiosity. And I think if you ever meet a doctor with a lack of curiosity, you need to send them for reinstallation of the operating system, because I mean that's a really, really severe functional error. And I'm saying that because I've been involved in self-monitoring of pregnant women, and we'll talk about that on Friday. And during that process, we realized that it really needed input from the women, from the users, and I think you would be a fantastic in such a cooperation. So during your process, did you cooperate with the healthcare system? Did you cooperate with doctors about developing your tracking devices and functionality?
Yeah, so thanks. I did. So actually, already in 2011, I started collaborating with my partners then with Paul Abramson, who is a doctor in San Francisco. And Paul, he called himself at least, a quantified doctor. And he was really an early adopter as an MD. But he's also special in the sense that he was taught or trained as an aerospace engineer before he became an MD. So he really has that kind of mindset. And he has his practice in San Francisco, and I met up with him in the fall, and he's really taking it some steps further. And actually there's a kind of interesting point about his practice too, is that he's also an addiction specialist. And there have been some questions around self-tracking. Is it addictive, and do people get obsessed? And what Paul he actually does is that he has people that are addicted to shopaholics or drugs and stuff. And then he says, well, it's much less of an addiction if I get them addicted to self-tracking. It's much better that they're addicted to tracking some data around themselves than it is that they go on a shopping spree every day. So it's all about trade-offs, right? Yeah.
Also this notion of addiction, because already it's underlined by the assumption that we know what the borderline is, and when you do become addicted. But really, I mean, that is forever shifting. I mean, what do we define as addicted or addictive self-tracking?
Yeah, and you might be, like Paul, he's doing, like, you might be able to change kind of your addictions. So before I start doing this self-experimentation and basically changing kind of my metabolism too, I was much more addicted to sugar. I'm not anymore. So there might have been some, self-tracking addiction in between, but for now I'm a different place and I'm not addicted to sugar anymore. Yeah.
Yeah. Is this on? Yes. Yeah. Thanks very much for 2 wonderful films. And I really appreciate this discussion about the politics of what we're involved in. But beyond the debate between empowerment and optimization as against normalization, surveillance and control, Thomas is talking about creating his own equipment, made me think of there's a political economy here around the hardware, the creation of mobile phones and all the tracking devices and everything, and especially the use of conflict minerals in creating those, with the wars in sub-Saharan Africa so much based on trying to control those minerals, access to those minerals. So there seems to be a much bigger political economy behind this whole movement of creating these technologies and marketizing them and generating new markets for these technologies that we haven't yet touched on.
Okay, thanks. Again, thanks for 2 fantastic films. Certainly made me think, amongst other things, at the end of your film, Btihaj, about the ethics. And also, I think it went right through your film as well, Janet. And that there was a comment about honouring people's privacy, and that obviously is an ethical kind of statement. I'd like to hear your opinions on this. It seems to me that it is an ethical issue. We're trying to keep up with what's happening technologically, never mind ethically. And then there's the policy level after that as well. So I'd be delighted to hear any comments you may have on these things. I think they're important.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Thanks for your question. Well, in terms of privacy, I think there's a lot of debate in both the quantified self community, but also outside of the community about what is done with the data. And what the everyday user does not realize is that they don't own the data they generate. It's actually owned by the brand. But like Fitbit, if you use Fitbit, it's Fitbit who owns the data you generate. It's not yours. And that's something that really people don't comprehend as yet. The other thing is that when you look at the terms and conditions, they are very vague or they don't exist. Actually, a research by Semantic a few years ago, it revealed that 50% of the brands on the market, like including the famous brands like Nike Plus and Fitbit and Jawbone and so on, they don't actually come with the terms and conditions about what is done with the data. And when they do, the data, those statements tend to be very vague and ambivalent in purpose. It's like Fitbit says, we will never share your data unless it is necessary to do so. But they don't say when it is necessary to do so, which defeats the purpose of having terms and conditions in the first place. So people are now starting to talk about privacy by design. Is that privacy should be a default status in what you design. It's not like an afterthought. You design something and then it's set as shareable by default, and then it's up to the user to put it as private or not to share it. But now they're talking about doing it the way around. It's having that data private in the first place, and then it's up to the people to share the data if they want to. And I think that's already a positive thing. And some people also practice what they call obfuscation, like they supply wrong data or they put Fitbit on their dogs and cats and let them run around in order to, to cheat the system and to fool the system as such. So for me, privacy remains one of the most contentious kind of concepts and practices in self-tracking, definitely. And I'd be interested to hear your thoughts about privacy.
Yeah, so perhaps I should just kind of disclose a kind of dirty secret as a, technologies too. The companies that have amassed data, like for instance Fitbit and even Clue, the Clue app, they've actually been able to get much less out of it than you would think. The thing is, and that's kind of consensus in QS, is that there's too little of a context in that data to actually be really kind of personal about it. Yeah. So there's a narrative about how much those companies they would like to use that data for, and they have kind of oversold it, potentially even to their investors. But now they have amassed all this data, they're actually getting less out of it than they thought. Yeah. So I think we'll also see like a new, a kind of turn or second wave or something where we have other kind of services where there's a concept of like differential privacy, where it's very clear that you give some data to some cloud service, for instance, for them to be able to calculate certain things on your data. I think we'll be seeing that. And then in a much larger context, I think when looking at self-tracking and the quantified self-movement, perhaps you need a kind of Western liberal democracy for such a thing even to kind of emerge. During the last year, I've been more and more concerned about the tendencies in the surveillance apparatuses, the intelligence communities, even in the Western liberal democracies. Because if you can't really trust that the data that you collect yourself can be used against you, would you dare collecting it? I don't think self-tracking and quantified self would have arisen in Soviet Russia. Because that data the data would be a liability to yourself, whereas in a Western liberal democracy, at least up to now, it's an asset that you've been able, at least if you're collecting just for your own purpose, that you can be using yourself. And I think that's something to think about there. Yeah.
And I think also what I've noticed as well is that increasingly privacy is being cast as the opposite of public good. So there's, especially within Quantified Self, there's a lot of talk about sharing your data for medical research and to do good for others and to help others with similar diseases or similar allergies and so on. But the problem with that is that they kind of pit people against each other, like those who cherish the privacy, they are being pitted against those who are advocating what we can call data philanthropy. And I think that's a dangerous move because, first of all, it's simplistic because privacy is not only a personal good, but it's also a public good. I mean, it allows us to maintain the needed, boundaries and protections from the encroachments of governments and companies and so on. So it's not just personal; it's also public. But unfortunately, it seems like privacy is losing kind of its thrust within these discussions about the need to share your self-tracking data in order to help the larger community and society and other patients and so on. I mean, for instance, 2 years ago, patients like me ran a whole campaign using videos and all sorts to encourage people to donate their medical data, their private medical data, for medical research and for helping other patients as well. So I can see how it's beautifully philanthropic, but at the same time it's very risky as well, especially if we are kind of leaving behind this right of privacy, which people fought for before. I mean, we should not take for granted these liberal kind of ideals. I mean, we criticize them often within academia, but we should not take them for granted. People fought for them, but now we take them for granted, and so.
Well, I think there's also the danger of data matching, and when you sign in something, use your Facebook instead of just your email, and then that can be matched with all your other data. Yeah. And I think law enforcement agencies, because I'm actually a criminologist by training, law enforcement agencies really want to get hold of as much data as possible in order to, whatever they want to do to track the bad guys or terrorists or, finding the needle in the haystack, as they call it. And so this whole big data technology with analytics and so on aim to just, hoover in as much as possible and then use those kind of machine learning and so on to try and identify people who are suspicious or whatever. So I think it may be at the moment they can't make use of some of the Fitbit stuff, but once they get matched. And in Australia we have this terrible system just recently where they match people's tax files with their social security, the welfare payment, and they started saying that people are owing money because their employment status and their tax, were different. But in fact, there were good reasons for it, and people were sent like bills of thousands of dollars saying you owe the government $10,000, and they're sending out collection agencies to recover them. They're not giving people, a chance to explain. And if you try to ring the line, you're there forever, being kept on the waiting list. So it can be very dangerous.
Well, thank you very much for your questions, and thank you for the panel. It's 6:30 now, so I would like to invite you for a glass of wine, and we can continue the discussion downstairs. Thank you so much.